Set up my computer here. All right, well, hello everybody. Good morning from Olympia, Washington. So I'm just gonna wait a couple of minutes for other people to log in, but in the meantime, I thought we could do a couple of icebreaker questions. So using the chat box, go ahead and type in where you're calling from and why you were interested in today's presentation. All righty, here we go. So Pittsburgh, general interest in all things bike touring. DC, interested in diversity and cycling. Let's see, Missoula. Oh, cool, Berkeley, California. Representation is important, I agree. Nice. Seattle, nice, I'm in Olympia. Topic very seldom talked about. Portland, San Diego, wow, cool. All right, how about we type in what we like most about cycling? It's fun. Downhill, certainly going downhill is better than up in most cases. What's not to like about cycling? I agree. Exploring, keeping me healthy during this crazy time. I agree, it's a really good time to start biking. Smelling the air. Freedom, adventure, excitement. We have someone who's been a track racer for the last 15 years. It's very cool. Meeting great people. Yes. I've met really interesting people through warm showers, actually. So I agree. And feeling empowered. Yeah. Great. Let's see. One more question. What's your dream bike? This doesn't have to be a specific brand or type. Maybe just like if you want a new mountain bike or something. The one I have. Nice. Trekkie bike. Folding bike. Yeah, that'd be nice. All right. Well, it is 11:03, so I'm going to address some housekeeping rules. And actually, you should have all received an email earlier today about some of these rules. So I'm just going to go over them again real quick. Everyone who's entering the presentation is doing so on mute. So I'm going to ask you to stay muted for the entirety of the presentation. But at the very end, there will be an opportunity for us to have a more usual conversation. And let's see, I will also have breaks throughout the presentation. So I'm gonna ask if you have any questions or comments to just use the chat box. And Eva's gonna be monitoring those during those breaks. And please do not click on any links through the chat box unless they've been shared by myself or Eva. And if you want to just view myself, you can select speaker view through your Zoom options. But if you want to see who else is attending, you can just go to, I believe it's general view or gallery view, I'm sorry. All right, so I'm going to kick things off here. Hello, my name is Jocelyn Munoz, and I'm an ACA ambassador, a recent ACA ambassador. And you can see me here outlined in red. And today I'm going to be talking about diversity in the bicycle travel community. And I'm going to be talking about this topic through my perspective as a first-generation Latina woman. I was motivated to do this presentation because I think that in order to promote diversity successfully, we need to start having more conversations that acknowledge the struggles that people of color face while we try to navigate predominantly white spaces And I also wanted to provide a resource for anybody who's out there who's interested in starting or interested in getting more familiar with cycling. So just let me know at any point if you're not able to see my slides. But some facts about me. I was awarded the 2015 Young Adult Bike Travel Scholarship through ACA, which is how I established my relationship with ACA. And actually, I'm just gonna do something real quick here so I can have access to the comments. So give me just a second. Where'd those comments go? There we go. Sorry about that. Took me a while to find it again. So yeah, I was awarded the 2015 Young Adult Bike Travel Scholarship. That's how I got familiar with ACA, and I'm actually going to be going over the details of this scholarship in my last slide. I think it's one of the more valuable resources out there for new cyclists, especially those that are trying to get into overnight or bike touring. I'm an avid cyclist, climber, and backpacker. And as I talk about my experience within the cycling community, I'm going to be talking about my experience in all of these communities. And as you'll see, I'll draw from a couple examples from cycling and climbing and backpacking. I'm currently a wetland biologist for the state of Washington. I reside in Olympia, and I love many things about my job. But I think one of the harder things is exclusively working around people who don't look like me. And that's also something that I struggle with while I'm in the outdoors. And I'm a first generation Guatemalan American, which is obviously really relevant to the presentation, as I'm going to try to share my experience as a daughter of immigrants and how that played a role in the outdoors for me. All right, so I wanted to provide an outline because as I was creating this presentation, I realized that there were just a lot of topics that I could talk about, a lot of topics that I could address, and I just wanted to provide you with some information on what I'm going to talk about today. So Eva Dunfrobic, the Events and Outreach Coordinator for ACA, will actually be going over some general ACA details and information. And then I wanted to share with you some online resources through ACA's website. And then I wanted to share my story, more specific details, and kind of dive into my background a little bit, where I'll talk about how I grew up, where I grew up, my biking experience, and then some of the advantages and disadvantages that I feel played a role in my outdoor journey. And then I wanted to spend some time talking about some of the underlying issues that I think impact POC participation in the outdoors. And I also wanted to provide a section for any new cyclists or beginners who are interested in this community, some pro tips on how I think you should go about it, or some helpful advice, hopefully. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, the last slide, I was going to provide more details on the Greg Cypel Award, which is that travel scholarship that I was awarded in 2015 and since then has changed names. And then one last thing, I just wanted to acknowledge that there are many different terms and acronyms that we can use to refer to people of color. And just for simplicity, I'm going to keep using POC or say people of color, but I wanted to acknowledge that I'm including all Black, Brown, Indigenous, and minority groups from underserved communities. All right, Eva, do you want to take over?
Sure, thank you, Jocelyn. First of all, I just want to thank you for giving this presentation. I'm really excited that you're covering this topic because I think it's an important one, and adventure cycling should be talking about this. So thank you so much. And most of you who are listening today are probably familiar with Adventure Cycling Association, but in case you're not, I'm just going to give a quick overview. Like Jocelyn said, I'm Eva Dunfrobic. I'm the Events and Outreach Coordinator at Adventure Cycling Association. We're based in Missoula, Montana, and I am at home in Missoula because most of our staff are working from home right now, although we do have a few in our office at our headquarters in Missoula. But Adventure Cycling Association is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to inspire, empower, and connect people to travel by bicycle. And we have over 50,000 members. All of our members receive our magazine, Adventure Cyclist, in the mail, which comes out 9 times a year. And Jocelyn's going to share a link with you later in the presentation where you can become a member of Adventure Cycling and try it out for 6 months for free and start getting the magazine and see if you like it. So please take advantage of that and share the link with friends as well if you'd like. We also create bicycle routes. We have over 50,000 miles of bicycle routes, and we make maps of those routes with services and turn-by-turn directions to help people who want to go on a long-distance bicycle trip. We have guided tours, and what kind of sets us apart with our guided tours from other tour companies is that we also offer educational tours. We have an intro to road touring and an intro to dirt touring course, and we also offer a leadership training course. Of course, this year we had to cancel many of our tours, but we are excited that we recently announced a new slate of tours, and we're going to be offering some short weekend tours this year, which we're excited about, or in 2021, we'll be offering some shorter, like 4-day tours. Because we'd like to introduce the idea of shorter bicycle trips that are more accessible to people. So you'll be hearing more about that coming from Adventure Cycling soon. But if you're interested in our shorter tours, go to the guided tours section of our website at adventurecycling.org. We also offer online resources, a lot of great information on our blog, and Jocelyn's going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. We also do advocacy work to improve bicycle travel conditions and work with state departments of transportation and national parks and state parks, you know, the places that are really beautiful and where you want to ride your bike. We work to make those places safer and make camping more accessible for people traveling by bike, since when you're on your bike, you have different needs than people traveling in a vehicle. We also have an online store called Cyclosource, where we sell bike travel gear. So we're kind of the one-stop shop for bicycle travel and do everything related to it. So thank you, Jocelyn. I'll let you continue with your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for providing all of that information. So yeah, I just wanted to spend some time going over some of the online resources that I think are especially helpful for people who are just getting introduced to bicycle travel. Specifically, and let me know if you're able to see this or not. If someone just wants to type in yes in the chat box, if they're able to see it, perfect. So I wanted to go over or show you at least the blog and the forum. The blog offers a lot of information on a range of topics. You can organize the information at the top here, and you're just going to find content on if you're planning new bike tours, if you need gear reviews, information like that. And then you also have access to other videos that other ambassadors have done. So I know Mary McGowan recently did a presentation on her bike tour in Washington State. So you can find that kind of stuff on this link. And then similarly, you can go to the forum to get information that's also organized pretty nicely. You have information that's organized by topic. So if you want more information on routes or specific gear, and then you can also find information based on region. So I just wanted to show you those two, especially for those that are sort of kind of new to ACA. And then through this link that I've provided in the presentation, you can also find information on the different scholarships and awards that ACA is involved with. And if you are someone who has experience already with bicycle touring and you want to get more involved with ACA, I suggest looking into their ambassador program because it's a really neat opportunity to kind of use their platform to reach new people. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show you on the specific ACA website. All right, so now I'm going to talk about myself. This isn't actually something that I've done a lot of, so I hope that there's some value in just kind of hearing a little bit more about my story, just some of the details here. And let me grab the pointer. Perfect. So I was born in the northern Los Angeles County, specifically the San Fernando Valley, and even more specifically Van Nuys, the city of Van Nuys. And for those that aren't familiar with LA and the layout, it's a really big place, and Van Nuys has a large demographic of Hispanic immigrants. And my parents emigrated from Guatemala when they were in their late teens, early 20s. So at that very young age, they decided that they would go to Van Nuys. Actually, I'm not sure if they even knew that was the destination, but they were going to move to a new country without knowing anybody and speaking the language, just so that they could provide the basic financial needs for their family back home. So growing up, my parents worked a lot, and they still do. They were working 2 to 3 jobs each, which meant that at a young age, I also kind of took over the responsibility of taking or raising my younger brother. And actually, the person you see in this picture is not my younger brother. He's my twin brother. And so I was looking for pictures of just myself, and I think my parents decided that they would just photograph us together for like age 1 to 12. So I don't have any pictures of just myself, but yeah, it's Jeff, and he's photobombing this presentation. So yeah, because my parents worked a lot, we also tended to move around quite a bit from apartment to apartment around the valley usually. And my parents kind of chose these transitional neighborhoods adjacent to low-income neighborhoods and also middle-class families. But because they worked so much, we weren't really exposed to the outdoors. We didn't really know about hiking, or especially things like backpacking and bike touring and climbing. That was really not something that people in our community were doing. But it's something that I got more familiar with when I went to college. And actually, this is one of the first bikes that I was able to get while I was a student at UCSC. And I used cycling to mostly commute up to campus and to commute to work, run errands. So I got pretty comfortable with riding around town through and with traffic. But one year I was going up to campus, and I went through the recreation department, and I found out about a grant and a scholarship really that allowed me to choose any outdoor trip at no cost. So here in the third picture, you can see I chose the women's backpacking trip in Big Sur, and I'm actually just going to place the marker right over me. And this was the first time that I went backpacking. Up to this point, I really just knew about camping through, I think, The Parent Trap. And that's all I knew about it. So I was really excited after this trip to just explore more about the outdoors. And about a week or two after this trip, I decided that I would go on a bike, on a century ride. And I went on my first century ride on this really old road bike that didn't shift gears, and the brakes didn't really function. I had to use my foot to stop the bike, especially when it was really wet out or it was raining. And I'm not sure how that didn't deter me from completely ever cycling again. I think it had the opposite effect, where I really just wanted to get better gear and get better at cycling. And because I hadn't really done any long distance cycling before that, I wanted to push my physical boundaries. Even though the last 20 miles of that ride, I blacked out and don't know how I got back home. But the next year, I was motivated to start my own bike touring program or sector through the recreation department. So I applied to be a trip leader, and I, in the process, was looking up and researching grants that could secure funds to start a bike rental program, because I wanted to rent out bikes and gear as easily as I was renting out, backpacks and climbing gear. But through that research, I found out about the ACA travel scholarship. And even though I wasn't successful in securing any funds, I decided to just go ahead and lead bike tours anyway. So this, let's see, sixth picture here was a picture I took on my first bike tour that I led. Even though I knew I was excluding the group of people that I wanted to include through those trips, I still wanted to see if it was even feasible to do a bike tour through a college recreation department. And then shortly after leading those trips, I found out that I was the recipient of the scholarship, and you can see I wasted no time in getting to use that gear. That summer, I think I went on 2 bike tours, and it was amazing because I had all of this new great gear. I had a sleeping bag, a sleeping pad, and a tent. So up to this point, I was really just backpacking with a sleeping bag and a rain or a trash bag to protect me from the rain. So after graduating from college, I stayed in California for another year, and I was working as a botanist for BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and I was really backpacking a lot in the Sierras, and that's kind of where I got a lot of my outdoor experience. And then after that, I moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, and this is a picture I took while I was at Denali. And unfortunately, while I was in Fairbanks, I realized that I couldn't afford to go to college in the first place. So I was, how do I say this? I had a new permanent roommate, Sally Mae, and I wanted to kick her out. So I decided in Fairbanks that I would do what my parents taught me best, and that was to just work really hard. So I ended up working 2 to 3 field positions, working 70 to 80 hours a week so that I could gain back my financial independence. And now, fortunately, I am in Washington. I have a more stable position. I'm in a more stable place. And I'm really excited because thus far I have only done 2 Century rides and 4 bike tours. All of the bike tours, or most of them, were based out of Santa Cruz. So I did Santa Cruz to Big Sur, which was a shorter trip, and then Santa Cruz to LA, and then Santa Cruz to the Mexico border. You can see that every time I went on a bike tour, I pushed myself a little bit more. And then I did a loop around Crater Lake and Bend. And I'm really excited because now in 2021, I expect to have a lot more time. So I'm looking to do a loop around the Olympic Peninsula and then a shorter ride from Seattle to Portland. So yeah, I'm really excited. I'm going to break here. So if you have any comments or questions or want me to elaborate on anything else, just let me know. And if not, we can keep going.
You just said you hadn't shared your personal story very much, and I just wanted to say thank you. It was really great to see and to hear about. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Before I answer some of these questions, I have a comment here that presentation mode would be better than browser mode. Are you guys seeing the slides just fine? Okay, cool. Let's see. All right. So some of the solo backpacking trips, I'm assuming, solo backpacking trips, I did a lot of trips in Yosemite, just because I feel like national, hi Yael. I think that's Yael. I've known her since high school. So yeah, some of the solo trips in Yosemite, I just felt like national parks were easier places to learn how to solo trip. Your first 4 bike tours solo. Yes and no. I guess the number of bike tours is not super accurate. I did Santa Cruz to Big Sur a few times. So the first time I did Big Sur, I did it with 2 other friends. The second time I did it by myself. I ended up doing Santa Cruz to LA by myself. I met someone along the way, but they were having bike issues. So I ended up being mostly by myself. And then the Santa Cruz to the border, I did with one other friend, and then the loops around Oregon were by myself. So a mixture. I kind of like to do things with other people if I can, but I think at the time, especially, that was so new to college students that, yeah, not many people were able to join. Cool. All right, so I think that is it. I'm gonna keep going. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments along the way, just feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll eventually get to them. Okay, so I often get asked by a lot of my close friends and family how I got involved in the outdoors to begin with. And I honestly think that it was just a combination of a bunch of different variables, but I'm calling them advantages, but really what they were privileges. And the first one was obviously having been able to go to college. That was the most relevant or direct resource that I got to be able to access the outdoors. And I wanted to talk about this a little more because um, even though, I wasn't actually able to afford college, I think the fact that my parents enrolled us in predominantly white schools growing up played a huge factor in me deciding to go anyway. Growing up, we went to schools that just had a higher quality education and they had more diverse groups. And I'm not necessarily referring to ethnicity here. I'm just kind of like I was able to join journalism and swim team, and those all were not being offered at my homeschool in Van Nuys. So I think having been surrounded by people who had access to that, and also my high school was really competitive. So people were naturally talking about college as their next step and how it was really important where they went. And I think that kind of just also rubbed off on me. Like I saw it as my natural next step. And then we referring to my siblings and I grew up in safer neighborhoods. And, my parents worked really hard. They couldn't get us in the best area, but we were in areas that had a lower crime rate than the adjacent areas. And we were closer to the middle class areas that had the better schools. So I feel like also having been surrounded by and being exposed to nicer areas that had better resources, I kind of wanted that for myself, even as a young kid. So I think this really pushed me to go to college and do everything else that I did after that. And then I had a supportive family. And my parents, obviously, I'm going to keep saying it, they worked really hard, but they also made immense sacrifices. Not only did they work hard, but they also didn't mind commuting up to an hour to get to the nicer schools. And that's not to say that my other family members didn't have a supportive family. It's just that because they were in areas where it was harder to get to those schools, that wasn't necessarily an option for them. And then I think that after college, I worked really hard and I wanted to, like I said, just kind of get back my financial freedom so that I could start taking vacation and I could start backpacking. And actually, this is a picture that I took, I think it was a trip last year in Skagway. So it's funny, after I moved out of Alaska, I ended up going back to Alaska to recreate because I finally had the time. But I also think that I was really lucky because I had all of these new resources in college. UCSD was a really green school, and so time outdoors was really valued there. Now I'm going to be talking about some of the disadvantages or barriers that I had to overcome to access the outdoors. And I think the first one is pretty obvious. The cost that it takes to get gear and permits and fees, and for a low-income family that can be pretty difficult, especially for my family where we lived paycheck to paycheck, and my parents had to be a little more creative with how they met our basic financial needs. This was just not a conversation that we could have. And then there's also doubt that comes with doing something new for the first time and not being able to ask anybody, at least, with me, I wasn't able to ask any friends or family for specific advice. And I can think back to the first women's backpacking trip that I did. And even though I knew I was going to be with a group of people, the weeks leading up to it, I was still very anxious about the fact that I didn't have any experience pitching a tent or going hiking, and I was worried that I was going to hold back the team, and I was worried that I was also going to get judged for not knowing how to do some of those things. And sometimes that can make you feel like you don't belong in a community. And specifically, I can think back to when I was a trip leader through the recreation department. I really felt like an outcast because a lot of times I felt like I couldn't really contribute to the conversations they were having. And I don't feel like they were ever doing anything intentionally, but I do feel like because we came from such different backgrounds, it was harder for me to contribute to their conversations. And then there's the lack of resources. And I think this one is also pretty obvious in that lower income communities don't have the same access to resources in terms of finding how to participate in the outdoors. There aren't as many trails, or there aren't as many people that you know or surround yourself with that do those activities. So after doing some research after doing some research to try to find some of the underlying issues that affect POC participation in the outdoors, I stumbled upon Tamika Butler's website, and Tamika served as the executive director of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. And back in July, she published an article about race in the cycling community. And she featured 14 different stories from different people who highlight their experience in the cycling community as well. And actually in the next slide, I'm going to be going over some of the quotes from some of the stories that I read. These were quotes that impacted me, that I felt like I could relate to, even though we come from different backgrounds. But before going to that slide, I wanted to talk about some of the underlying issues. The first one being unequal access. And as I've mentioned already, because poverty tends to be more prevalent in communities of color, access to things like bike shops, bike racks, bike trails, and especially bike lanes is directly linked to how the nation built our communities. And I'm by no means qualified to talk about the racial policies that separated Blacks from whites. But I did want to share a statistic from the book, The Color of Law, which goes into some of these laws. That statistic states that 41% of children born to parents in the least wealthy families remain in the lowest quintile as adults. And I'm sharing that statistic because it really shows the lack of income mobility across generations. So when our communities were built to not have the same resources as middle class and wealthy communities, and it's increasingly difficult to leave those communities, we're still having the same issue of not being able to access certain things. And then the next point has to do with marketing. And we all know that the face of the marketing or the outdoor industry, for a while has been shifting from the white man to be more inclusive of gender. But we're still not seeing people of color being represented to the same degree, especially when it comes to being on the cover of a magazine. And this does a disservice to all of us because it doesn't accurately represent the outdoor demographic. And it further enables this idea that the outdoors are exclusively for white people. And then we also have resource investment. And even though I've been talking about resources a bit, I have more of a question when it comes to resources in this slide. Because I've noticed that there has been a shift in new initiatives and new plans, and there's been more funding to try to promote diversifying the outdoors. But I'm wondering how many of those resources are accessing the communities that need it the most, and whether we are seeing a shift in the outdoor demographic because of that, or if we're still kind of just kind of stagnating a little bit because they're not reaching those communities. So I also wanted to share Tamika's blog link so that you have access to those 14 stories. I highly recommend reading those because they're offering a different perspective on a lot of these different issues on diversity in the cycling community. Okay, so as I mentioned, I wanted to go over some of the quotes that I took from these stories. These are quotes that I could relate to even though we come from completely different backgrounds. So in her article, Rachel Olzer describes what it's like for her to not see other Black cyclists. She says, it's not simply about wanting to see Black people for the sake of seeing Black people. It's about what the absence of seeing Black people means. The absence of anyone who looks like you symbolizes all the barriers that we as a people have faced because of structural inequality. And then Erica L. states, when talking about how she felt ignored at her club's bike rides, how could something so innocent as riding a bicycle make another human being feel discarded? When talking about planning for transportation, Keith Benjamin writes, the challenge is to embrace a new perspective and shift the line of questioning. Instead of what, we should be asking who benefits from change, who is a part of the process, and who gets left behind. When you focus on the who, you begin to see your blind spots and hear the voices of the unheard. And last but certainly not least, Grace Anderson explains that they feel the most safe and seen when they're in spaces where they're reflected and celebrated. All right, so how can we support change within the outdoor and the cycling community? Well, my first recommendation is that I think we all need to learn more about the underlying issues, and this is something that we've heard a lot, or a lot being said about this in 2020. Obviously, there are a lot of complex reasons, and everything is so intertwined. And I think that the more we commit to learning about these things, the more success we'll see. And then we can also learn about the organizations that are supporting diversifying the outdoors. A lot of times these organizations are nonprofits, and they're not getting the same media coverage or recognition that larger companies are getting, which is unfortunate because they end up doing a lot of the on-the-ground work that it takes to promote social equity. And then we can donate or volunteer. And I've been hearing this saying a lot this year, that the first color America sees is green. And I think where you invest and who you support makes the loudest statement. So if you're in a position to make a monetary contribution to these organizations, look to see if you have anyone nearby or anything local. And if you're not, consider donating some gear. A lot of the times these organizations have new events for new cyclists, day rides. So see if they need any extra helmets or gloves or clothing. And excuse me, I know that's a little hard to do right now because of COVID, but maybe this is something to keep in mind for the future. And if you're not in a position to donate, consider volunteering your time. And actually, one of the articles I read while prepping for this presentation made a really good point that a lot of the nonprofit organizations need a lot of help behind the scenes. So if you're someone who has skills in web design, reach out to them and see if they need help with the website. Or if you're someone who has a lot of networking skills, reach out to see if they have any upcoming events. And of course, this is something that's going to have to wait, especially with the events because of the pandemic, but something to keep in mind. All right, and the last point, accountability. I think we all have our favorite brands. I certainly do that I'm loyal to. And I think that, there's no shame in supporting those brands, but what we can do as a consumer and a supporter is to encourage them to be honest about how their marketing has affected communities of color. And especially after the killing of George Floyd this summer, a lot of companies made statements for the first time, and they came up with new initiatives and plans. And I think that as a supporter, the best we can do is to make sure that they're sticking to these initiatives, because social equity tends to be the first thing that companies drop as soon as things get a little hard. And this year has been hard, especially with COVID. So that's just something that I think we can all do. And I wanted to provide some examples of national resources that are involved with social equity work. So there's Melanin Base Camp, and I've provided their link here. Their mission is to increase BIPOC representation in the media. And I wanted to provide an example of what their blog post looks like, because they primarily feature bloggers who are people of color. So they're just going to offer a new perspective on some of these issues. And similarly, we have Diversify Outdoors. Their mission is to promote access to the outdoors for diverse identities. I've also provided their link and an example of their more recent published blogs. Again, they feature primarily people of color who are just going to have a different take on some of these issues. And I definitely could not find or provide an exhaustive list of all these resources, but I did want to give folks some range, especially if people are calling in from different cities, of what is out there. So if you live in any one of these places, consider looking into them. And if you have more information on them, please share with us at the very end. So I'm going to take another break here. I know that was a lot. So if we have any new questions, please let me know. And I have to go and find those questions. Here we go. All right, well, doesn't seem like we have any questions. We have a couple comments. Terrific quotes. Someone says, number 3, no sense of belonging. I'm assuming they're agreeing with that. Will you be sharing a doc that has all the links? Yes, and yes, I can. At the very end, I have a citations page of all of the articles that I read that kind of inspired some of these points. So I can compile a list of all of those articles in addition to the links to these resources, and maybe have Eva send them out because she has the participant list. Any more questions? I have someone moving through barriers, not feeling confident, not having others to go with on bike tours. How do you still go? That's a really wonderful question. I think personally, I was just really eager to get in the outdoors. And I have a lot of great stories about sketchy situations because I didn't know any better. So, but I am going to share some more thoughts on that later on. But one thing that I'm going to share is that maybe it's best to also consider who you want to be in your community, and you can create a group yourself. And so if, you know, and I know you can do this through meetups, and if you want to create a group specific to women cyclists, you can do that. If you want to create a group specific to Hispanic hikers, you can do that. So I think, and that's one of my suggestions. We have another resource. I believe they're called Yes. I am not familiar with them, but would love to hear more. All right, so I am going to move on after a quick water break. All right, we have a couple more slides. And actually, let me get rid of that pointer. Okay, so this is a part of the presentation where I kind of transition into some of my tips for people who are wanting to get more involved in cycling. So the first two kind of go together. I mentioned that Van Nuys didn't, as a city, didn't itself offer a bike shop. So if you're in a similar position, I would recommend doing some research in advance and finding a bike shop that is near a park where you can have access to a wide trail or like a flat trail, and also a place where they have bike lanes. And this is important because I feel like a lot of times I hear from people that they're comfortable riding around parks, but not with traffic. So I think if you're doing a little bit of research in advance, you can find a place that maybe isn't as congested, and you can try riding through with their traffic as well. And then my third tip is to learn about local support. So if you do have a bike shop, look in to see if they have any weekend or weekly day rides. A lot of times they will, and check in to see if they have any specific to beginners. And this is the point that I was making while addressing the comment. You can start your own group if you're not satisfied with the support around you. And I suggest doing this through meetups. However, if anyone's had a negative experience through meetups, please let us know through the comments. I've used it quite a bit, especially since I've moved around, and I've had positive experiences, although I've never created my own group. And again, I think that creating your own groups gives you a little bit more control over who you feel comfortable around. So if you want to create something specific to gender or specific to ethnicity, you could do that. And then my fifth tip is to set clear goals. And some examples of this: if you already own a bike, you can push yourself to do weekly rides with other people. And I think that having a social aspect to it is really important, because you have people that hold you accountable, and you also have people from different backgrounds so that you can learn from each other. And if you don't own a bike, maybe setting a goal like renting a bike once a month or once a quarter, just so that you can get more familiar and at least just confident with the bike. So those are some of my tips. And then also, if you are going to be new to cycling, I suggest learning a little bit of bike maintenance. The REI in Fairbanks offered a free summer maintenance series. I'm not sure if all REIs offer that, and I do also know that REIs aren't available everywhere. So if you don't have an REI near you, consider just looking up how-to videos. A lot of those resources that I shared have content like that. ACA has content like that, and REI has detailed videos on how to do basic repairs. And then some of the tools that I'm including here that I think are a must if you're getting more serious about cycling, to have a tube, patch kit, pump, tire lever, and those are all pretty affordable. All right, so the Greg Cypel Award. If you are looking to get more experience touring, this is probably the most valuable resource out there, in my opinion. I will start with the fact that ACA has decided to postpone this award, so they will not be offering it in 2021. I believe this was just a combination of different factors. I know that COVID impacted a couple of things with securing partnerships and some of the gear. And then I know that they're also trying to promote and market this scholarship in communities that need it the most. So a couple of different reasons why that may have happened, but just some basic information on the scholarship. In order to apply, you have to be between 18 to 30 years old, and you have to produce a bicycle travel project with a social equity and diversity focus. And so when I applied, my project was to get the rental up and running. But because of course things changed, especially with the funding, I decided to do the bike tours. And then I did a presentation at an annual outdoor event about the basics to bike touring. So now the Greg Cypel Award is split up into two different options. You have the option to do the Intro to Bike Touring, which comes with an Intro to Bike Touring course, and it gives you a touring bike and gear. And then the second option is the Outdoor Leadership, and that gives you the Trip Leadership course, a gift card, and the opportunity to do a self-contained tour through ACA. You can find details on this award in the bottom right link. I also have it in the link where I went over the online ACA resources. And that concludes this presentation. I wanted to thank everyone for providing this space to talk about myself a lot. I wanted to thank ACA for giving me the platform, and I wanted to thank the individual in the picture, because I apparently am really awful at taking pictures of all of my adventures. And so in the weeks leading up to this, we were riding our bikes every day in Olympia to take enough pictures for the slides. And he was the one who did all of that work. And then I wanted to have people make note of the links that I'm providing in this slide. There's a link for the free membership. I believe that's a 6-month free membership with ACA. And if you're not familiar with ACA, I definitely recommend taking advantage of this, because it'll give you an idea of the type of content that they're producing and some of the benefits of being a member. And then there's the link for the ACA newsletter and podcast. So again, just a lot of cycling information. And I mentioned before the citations page. These are some of the articles that I read that kind of inspired the points. And then I did also link the 4 articles that I read from the 4 quotes that I shared with you. And again, I can compile a list of all of the links and then just send it to the participants. But I believe that's it. I believe I covered everything. All right, so do we want to open this up to the participants? I'm going to stop sharing. And I am not sure how to open it up, or if people, I think, just want to unmute themselves and share their screen. I think that's a way we can do that, and we can just, you know, talk about some of the things if you have any questions or comments.
It looks like somebody has a question about your dream bike trip that you hope to complete one day.
That's hard. I think I think there are a lot. I really wanted to do Alaska to Argentina. That's one that I definitely want to do, and I'm familiar with the terrain now. So I've driven up and down the Alcan now 3 times, so I know what to expect. But I think also maybe touring around New Zealand. That's another one that I want to do. But honestly, I just want to get back into touring. I really missed it. So, hi, Elle.
That's great. Let's see. There is a question. Do you have suggestions for those of us on the far side of 70 just getting into touring?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think if you are confident already on a bicycle, just, you know, commuting with traffic and, you know, like just as a commuter, doing something like an overnight. So when I first started, as you noticed, a lot of my tours were initially like really close, and then I just kind of started pushing my physical limits. So yeah, just starting really small, doing an overnight, going to a state park or a national park. I know that in Olympia we have a lot of state parks. So, and actually the person you saw in these pictures, Jay, he's my partner, and he hasn't done any bike touring. So our plan for next year is to just ride to the state parks, camp out, and then come back. And then hopefully that means he's ready for the Olympic Peninsula.
That's great. Somebody was asking the name of the book. I think it was one of the resources you shared.
Yes, it's The Color of Law. Can you see that?
Yeah, great. Somebody would like to know more about your Santa Cruz to Santa Cruz to San Diego route. Is that what Bill is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I can definitely share more about that. And actually, if people feel like they'd like to have a presentation about something specific, I know I can do a presentation on the Santa Cruz to San Diego trip. And there's, I mean, it happened a while ago, but and I probably don't have many pictures of it, but I still remember it in great detail. And just to answer that question without getting into the details, Santa Cruz, because of where it's located, is off the Highway 1. So Highway 5 and the 101 don't intersect Santa Cruz, which was really nice because that made it really easy for me to tour since I was already on the 1. So I took the 1 through Big Sur, and then I believe right after you get out of Big Sur, you either decide to do the 101 or the 5. So I just kept going on the 101 until I went back to the 1, and I just hopped between the 101 and the 1. I sounded very Californian there. But yeah, that's how I got down there. And I also used ACA's map. So yeah, that's how I did that trip. That's
great. Did we miss any questions, anybody? Please type it in again or just speak up if there's a question that we missed or that you want to ask. Oh, great question. Thank you, Malcolm. Any recommendations for Adventure Cycling Association for additional projects the organization can undertake to encourage more diversity in cycling?
Well, I recently had a conversation with Eva, who is more familiar with their new plans and initiatives. I think maybe you can speak on the details of that a little bit more, but I would love to be involved with that. And yeah, if you want to share some information on that.
Sure. Well, first off, I'll just say that adventure cycling has a lot to learn still about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are just starting to do some internal work where we're, reading and watching webinars and learning more about what we can do as an all-white staff and how we can inspire more people like Jocelyn to travel by bike and provide those resources and remove those barriers. So we are going to be talking more about this next week. Our executive director, Scott Pankratz, is putting on an event. Let me just pull up the information because I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe it's on Tuesday, but he will be talking more about our new initiatives to help us achieve our strategic plan that we adopted a couple of years ago. It's on, looks like, yeah, November 17th. At 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So tune into that. You can find the link and more information at adventurecycling.org by going to our calendar of events. And but he will be providing some more details. But basically, one of the initiatives that will help us, we hope, make bicycle travel more accessible is by focusing more on inspiring people to go on short trips. So just what Jocelyn said is that a bike overnight is a great introduction to bicycle travel, and we'll be creating some short routes from metropolitan areas and also providing more accessible educational resources for ambassadors like Jocelyn to inspire people like them to travel by bike and to actually take them on bike overnights. So, oh, thank you, Joe. Joe just posted the link to the event in the chat. So please tune into that to find out more details, but that's kind of just a little sneak preview. And we are also always open to any suggestions that people have specifically about diversity. And because like I said, we still have a lot to learn and we want to keep learning. So I think a great first step also is to have Jocelyn give this presentation because I've learned a lot in the past hour.
Yeah, and to add to that, actually, and I forgot the name of this individual. He started his own bicycle club in LA. He was a professional rider, and I'm forgetting his name, but he has a really great video through his club that I can share with you when I get the list of links, where he feels like putting a greater emphasis on the younger kids who live in low-income communities, because if they can find that attractive, if they can find that as something fun to do, then you start to increase the amount of people who are actually being exposed to those to bicycle travel and the outdoors. Justin Williams sounds, yeah, I think that might be it. But yes, Legion of Los Angeles. Yep, thank you.
That's great. And Adventure Cycling will be sure to get those links and resources out to everybody once we compile them and get this recording ready to send to everybody as well. Any last questions before we hit the 1 hour mark? Well, I really want to thank you, Jocelyn, and thank everybody for joining and listening and being part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining as well, and for providing this platform again. And then, you know, if there's any more interest in anything else, just I would love to keep doing some presentations. So, yeah.
Jocelyn, just wanted to say a quick shout out. I'm Scott Pankratz, Executive Director of Adventure Cycling. Thank you for being here and sharing your story, like very powerful, and you're part of the change we want to be a part of. Thanks for helping us lead that.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, thanks everybody. We're going to end the meeting now. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you again, Jocelyn. We really appreciate you taking the time to put this together.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.